Um, okay, I guess hello everybody. Welcome to the Catering Cage Uncaged with your host Erle Dardick over there. You want to say hi, Earl?
Hello, Earl.
Today we figured there'd be a slight change in format, and I'm hopping on to ask some questions and just have a conversation. We're going to be talking a lot about the future of the catering tech space, what that's looking like, what that means.
Hmm.
And I know that Earl has a lot of relations and understanding about that from the past and his monkey days and all that. So we're gonna be kind of going through it. Is there anything I'm missing in that summary?
No, sounds
Okay.
great.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gabe Dardick, no relation. Just kidding. There's a relation. So yeah, shall we just get into it?
Yeah, jump in. What do you got for me?
Okay, well, I think, just going to start with let's kind of give some context on what's actually happening in the space right now. Because we know there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of things moving around. So I was thinking we could start with why don't you just give our listeners a lay of the land? What's going on in the space right now?
What's going on in the space? You're referring to the catering space,
The
technology
catering
wise?
technology solution. So specifically on the software, some
Okay,
order management, all those
okay,
kinds of things, right?
okay. Yeah, well, I mean, we got to back up a step, Gabriel, and I think we
Right.
have to just kind of go like, how did we get here,
Okay.
and where is here? Okay,
Yeah.
and I would say where we are today, we're in the infancy of what is business to business order management in the context of multi-unit restaurants specifically.
Mhm.
And this is part of what is so complex and difficult to articulate and is an important conversation that we need to have with the industry for anybody who might be listening to this.
Mhm.
And ultimately, we got to back up a step because um, if we go back and roll the clock back about 4 decades, I guess 5 decades now, we're into where point of sale first came on the scene. Okay. And at that time, restaurants specifically were retailers. That's what they were. So they had
Mhm.
different formats. They had like, you could grab and go, you could eat in, you could take out. You might have a fine dining experience, which was a much more formal setting. And then, you had the birth of casual dining and all this stuff started to surface.
Mhm.
And the point of sale systems came onto the scene. Micros, for example, was a very early entrant into that. And in that time, the service concept or the service process was always like a customer would come in and interact with a team member.
Mhm.
Okay, and that team member would take an order. Now in the old days before point of sale, they would take it on a manual check.
Yeah.
Okay, they might have a cash register. All right. But as point of sale came on the scene, there was no longer where they still might take it on a manual check, but they would walk over to this machine,
Yeah.
and in there were buttons that were programmed um, for the menu items that were very specific to um, allocating those menu items to the table.
Yeah.
Okay. And the table had seating planogram, and so you knew that table 14, seat number one was having a steak and potatoes. Okay,
Mhm.
and you would enter that in, and you would leave it as an open check. Okay, and that information had to get to the kitchen.
Yeah.
Okay, that was
Yeah.
the next step. So the next step in point of sale evolvement was the kitchen.
Mhm.
Okay, and that was driving what was the manufacturing and fulfillment process for what were your menu items, but that was specific to the limited omni-channel experience, which at that time was like some sort of service style,
Yeah.
and maybe some off-prem at that time was takeout. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Fast forward the clock a little bit. Wonderful guys come along. I know Ed Ramsey, Tom Feltenstein, all these guys are working at McDonald's. They have
Mhm.
an idea. McDonald's was a big innovator in the space. Of course, their whole business became, um, make it faster, right? Another channel surfaces. The birth of drive-through is what
Yeah.
happens. Okay. And that drive-through channel drives a whole bunch of technology, mostly on the order entry side as you pull your car in. It was all about like keeping people in their cars and getting them through this line. But these retailers, these restaurants soon realized very quickly that in fact the impact of that new channel on restaurant operations was severe. It had its own set of issues. It had its own technology requirements, speed of processing, packaging requirements,
Yeah.
service requirements. Everything was different. Okay.
Hmm.
But they figured out that if they put it together in one place, that in fact what would happen is the average unit volume would increase of that particular store, and it would make it more profitable.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're into the 1970s, 1980s, somewhere in there. More point of sale comes on the market. These are all like what I would call organic. Many of them surfaced out of operators themselves.
Hmm.
Aloha, for example, interesting story. Par Brink, these were all very early companies. This is all before the internet, of course, and
Yeah.
everything was driven to like local hard drives,
Hmm.
and um, that's how it was. Okay, so um, as the years went by, the point of sale companies began to grow, and they started their own acquisition process where they started to purchase companies that were like kitchen display systems, KDS systems,
Yeah.
as an example. Um, they bought, CRM and loyalty companies as that happened. Okay, so now we're into the 90s. Okay, in the 90s is when like the internet is all happening, right? It's all like, it's like everybody knew that they had to have a domain name for their business. They didn't know why. I mean, I had, tonysdeli.com. What was
Yeah.
it? You would go to tonysdeli.com and it was a static web page. All it had on there were just like, literally some text-based, maybe some images at that point. I don't even remember, but um, it was basically a static web page. It didn't have any functionality. It didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And that was the 90s. And so as the 90s happened and the internet became more prevalent, that was the birth of what became software as a solution based services.
Yeah.
Okay. They appeared on the scene in the late 90s. I would say closer to like the early 2000s. Okay. After we sort of got through Y2K and all that stuff happened.
Hmm.
And you started to see the birth of what were software as a solution, SaaS based solutions that were leveraging the internet to move their solutions into the cloud. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is critical to understand. Okay. Because it's so much directly related to where we are right now. Okay. So when that happened, it changed the dynamic of the transaction and made things possible that weren't possible before. So now what you had restaurants who had legacy
Yeah.
because you still went to the restaurant, you still had the server keying in the order. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was still a manual, like, people-based experience. SaaS services hadn't infiltrated yet into there,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they started to blossom outside of the restaurant. And that's where the birth of e-commerce happened.
Mm.
And in the birth of e-commerce, what happened was a new technology came in and frankly disrupted the point of sale business in a big way, okay? Because it now um, made its solution available to those same customers.
Yeah.
So now a customer that was coming into your restaurant can go to your website and now they could order. And before that, it was text ordering. They could order on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Olo was Go Mobile. I mean, I knew Noah well when he was just doing that. He was a young man and just starting out 20 plus years ago. Um, and so what happened was in that process, um, you now had a digital world
Hmm.
which was disjointed. It was its own set of solutions and lived in the cloud.
Yeah.
It was a customer that could now make an order originally started on their laptops and computers, right? Okay. And what happened was you created a dynamic that was real time for your customer. So the big leap in that technology, okay,
Yeah.
was that if you used a solution in the cloud, then you had the internet as leverage, which created a real-time experience that was shared between the customers and the restaurants. They all shared the experience in real time. Okay. Now it was a self-serve model where customers can go and they can place their own orders.
Yeah.
They weren't relying on somebody else to place the orders for them. Okay.
Mm.
So that was sort of the birth of this e-commerce piece. And at that point, there were very early entrants, companies like Snapfinger, Ola was certainly in there, Onisys. These were early ventures. Um, And of course Monkey was part of that whole time. And so what ended up happening was during that sort of blossoming, if you will, very early adoption. Okay.
Mhm.
People were scared of it, like just like they are of AI today, slow to adopt.
Mhm.
Um, but there were people who were innovating and people who were trying things, and those companies that started, and I'm talking about the users now, right? Like these are
Yeah.
restaurants, okay? Um, and so the technology for the restaurant stack began to expand, and that's when you had the birth of what became the marketplace business.
Yeah.
So this is when like DoorDash came on the scene, Uber Eats came on the scene, and the Amazon effect, if you will.
Mhm.
Okay. And that drove yet another dynamic. And that created pressure for the restaurants that they needed some technology to connect everything.
To own that transaction. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where the thing stopped. And what I mean by that, okay, is there were early entrants, digital transactions, e-commerce established,
Hmm.
customer records, menus. Basically, they had to repeat and you know, do everything the POS was doing, right?
Yeah.
Except it wasn't built for an in-store dynamic. It was built for an off-prem dynamic. Okay. So this battleground for the customer record, which by the way, point of sale doesn't even have a customer record
Mm.
because it was all menu driven. It never had the concept of Gabriel, maybe a name for the table, but it never had the concept of putting Gabriel into a database,
Yeah.
tracking your order history. Uh, uh, Point of sale didn't have marketing, so as they started to grow, they acquired loyalty, CRM pieces, they acquired back office, they acquired KDS systems,
Hmm.
they acquired kitchen displays. Sorry, they acquired digital display systems, menu boards. Okay, then they got acquired. They started getting acquired by like payments companies.
Hmm.
Okay. So Heartland, for example, they bought Expient. My good friend Christopher Siebes, that was his experience.
Hmm.
Um, and it all started getting like this whole like enmeshed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mashed together.
So the question is, why did that happen? And the
Yeah.
answer, the answer is the reason it happened was because everybody was running to be the heartbeat.
Hmm.
Every one of those solutions wants to be the point of command, uh, the source of truth, like every
Yeah.
one of them. Okay. So while that this is what became the battleground,
Yeah.
was the battleground for the source of truth, which was which one of these systems was going to be the core system that determined the future of
Yeah.
my technology stack. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So this is important. So now we're into the 2000s, marketplaces are around. We start to see these APIs, point of sale moves to the cloud, more consolidation happens, private equity comes into this space, accelerates these young innovative companies, acquisitions start to happen.
Yeah.
Olo goes public, Monkey gets bought, Brink gets acquired by Par, all this sort of consolidation happening to the
Yeah. Yeah.
next place. Okay. In that process, some really big things happen. For example, Oracle buys
Hmm.
Micros.
Yeah.
That's okay. We have to go back and talk about what's happening here. Okay.
Yeah.
Oracle buys Micros. Why did Oracle buy Micros? That because they wanted an entrance into the food business,
Yeah.
and this was their way in. Okay. And so they said, well, we'll buy Micros, point of sale company, and we'll create something called Oracle Hospitality, which is what they did. Um, and we'll bring all of our other solutions.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what does Oracle have? Well, they've got full enterprise resource planning software. They're into full on manufacturing, bakeries,
Yeah.
factories, food factories. So they see the opportunity to bring in what is everything else around this point of sale system. Little did they know it was going to be twice as expensive and take 5 times longer than they thought. But the idea was right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that then brought in companies like, so there was NCR now was in the game, big global company, then
Hmm.
bigger, Oracle, big, much bigger,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
NCR. Okay. And so the big players became little players in the scope of what were the big players. And we're still in that process.
Yeah.
Okay. And we see that right now with Olo getting acquired, going back private. What happened there? But let's save that conversation for a little bit later. But I
Yeah.
just want, okay, we'll come back to that. But essentially, you know, this is the essence of, you know, how we ended up where we are. And in this, and then we fast forward the experience to the pandemic, okay?
Yeah.
And that accelerates off-premise completely. And you have this explosion of innovation and adoption into the digital ordering space. And you have all kinds of things that happen, including a whole bunch of imposters. Okay,
Yeah.
right? And
Fear
and
that.
and and those people go out and they get funding, they get money, and they start
Yeah.
blasting the market with their solutions, and frankly, just create a lot of confusion for a lot of people, where it's very hard to know who's winning, who's not, who's working, who's not, who's, you know, like where's it all going? Like this is the complexity. Now you have to take that within the context that we're talking about is in the multi-unit restaurant environment specifically.
Yeah.
All right. And that's a very specific set of problems, okay, that we're
Mhm.
solving, that we're talking about here. Okay. So, and it's all leading up to this catering software, what's going to happen next. And so, you know, restaurants are unique in that they're not like caterers,
Yeah.
okay, um, because they have restaurants to run, right? And so there's a difference there.
Yeah.
But, but when restaurants are under this change process, which has been undergoing for 20 years now. Remember what I said, point of sale. Originally, somebody was there putting the order in. Okay. Now you have a self-serve customer that's putting the order in. Now you got
Mhm.
marketplaces driving the orders in. Now you got kiosks, again, self-serve. Okay,
Mhm.
orders going in. You got call centers, people on telephones keying orders in.
Mhm.
Okay. And the question really becomes is, you know, what is happening to restaurants in that process? And what is happening to them is they are becoming forced to have a true omni-channel type experience where they have to sell their products and services into many different places,
Yeah.
okay, in order to survive. And the reason why that will work is because, and why it needs to be that way, is because the competition is so severe
Yeah.
and margins are getting thinner and thinner and thinner, that it's only the restaurants that drive efficiency and volume that are going to be the ones that survive the process. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, so when we look at the tech stack for a restaurant today and we talk about catering, we have to have a really big conversation with what are we talking about? Because catering breaks into its own subsegments. For
Yeah.
example, there's drop-off catering, there's
Mhm.
event catering, you know, there's setup and retrieve type catering, there's
Yeah.
pickup catering. I just named four, for example. Okay.
Yeah.
And those four are differentiated in terms of packaging.
Mhm.
So product, packaging, and service,
Yeah.
okay, is the differentiator between those types of transactions. And what even gets more complex is that it splits into business to consumer
Yeah.
transactions
And business to
and
business.
then business to business transactions. Okay. So this is the complexity of just the catering piece.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we start looking outside the restaurant industry, we start seeing things like event catering software, okay?
Yeah.
Or we start seeing things like ERP, enterprise resource planning
Yeah.
software. I've been able to find these amazing solutions all over the world that are just ripe, okay, for coming into this space and taking certainly the business to business channel, okay?
Mhm.
So for the most part, when we talk about restaurants and when we talk about the subset of restaurants, which is QSR, fast casual, casual dining,
Yeah.
those three, okay? There's a very specific genre of companies in there that need to be listening to the conversation that we're having here today.
Yeah.
Okay. Because their catering business right now is geared around corporate and
Yeah.
it's geared around drop off, and it's all about building relationships, knocking on doors, sampling programs, being able to have conversational ordering, using AI to expedite all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, but the business to business transaction is completely different than what online ordering companies are offering or what point of sale companies can do. It's beyond their capabilities. Okay.
Why do you think
And
that's there's such a misunderstanding on how that transaction functions for so many people in the industry?
yeah,
What do you think is
yeah.
the mistake in how people view that?
Well, they don't, so as a restaurant executive, I
Hmm.
don't understand well enough the mechanics of my catering business.
Hmm.
My catering business is not my restaurant business. It's completely different. And I have not taken the time to understand the mechanics of that business.
Hmm.
And the beautiful thing about it, which is once I understand the mechanics of that business and I figure out how to insert it into my business, that's when I make real money.
Yeah.
Okay. Because going back to the conversation, restaurants are forced now to have as many channels as possible, taking orders from everywhere, because your customers want to order from you for all
Yeah.
kinds of reasons, and they want to order from you wherever they feel like ordering from you today. So if they want to order from Easy Cater today, that's where you need to be able to take that order. Okay.
Yeah.
If they want to order, now of course you want them to order direct where possible, but if they're going to order direct, you got to give a better experience at Easy Cater. And if you're not willing to invest in all of
Hmm.
those elements, a business leader, packaging, people answering phones, trucks, like if you're not willing to,
Yeah.
then you're not in the catering business, so stop saying you are. And so you're basically in, like, if you want to rely on DoorDash, Uber Eats, Easy Cater to send you orders, and that's all you ever want to do, then you're not really a caterer.
Yeah.
So Easy Cater's the caterer. You're just a supplier. That's what you are, and you're running wholesale dollars, and you might want to do that. Maybe that's the right decision for you. But
Hmm.
um, but you have to understand what's happening. Okay, so regardless, the spaces for business to business, enterprise business to business order management technology is large. It's a grand space, and it covers off bakeries, commissaries, food manufacturing. There's so many. Like I'm tracking a spreadsheet that's probably got about 500 companies on it right now. And what's interesting is this conversation isn't happening that we're having right now.
Hmm.
And so the restaurant companies don't understand it, and the tech companies don't
Don't understand
understand it,
that.
right? And so
Yeah.
what you get is you get tech companies that say, um, "Hey, let's add catering to our solution stack." They make a big marketing splash. They say a lot of really great things. They bring in a whole bunch of experts. They talk about it, but the product itself doesn't work at scale. And
Hmm.
and we're and the reason we don't know that yet, and we're still figuring that out, is because our industry hasn't gotten to scale yet. All right. So the brands that know that are doing it at scale, they're not using their online ordering providers, or they've got some either custom solution, they've either brought it together, or they're using, I would say, like a best in class solution for
Hmm.
what are, and we know who they are, we know who they are out there, certainly in this market. And there's many others, because the conversation is not just about restaurants, but it's about grocery, it's about
Yeah.
convenience stores. They're all in the conversation. I mean, FoodStorm was a product, is a
Yeah.
product. It's a great B2B commissary based manufacturing, and they were acquired by Instacart. And why did Instacart do that?
Mm.
Okay, and Instacart did it because they were an e-commerce company, or are an e-commerce company, and they have the B2C side of it,
Yeah.
and they didn't have the B2B. So they bought FoodStorm for the B2B side,
Hmm.
and they understand what they're doing, and now they've built corporate relationships with companies, and they're
Hmm.
filling their pantries.
Yeah.
Instagram is okay, and now they're doing catering. Like I'm seeing, Gelson's just rolled out a catering program in LA. I think like 28 locations, powered by FoodStorm. Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. And that's
Hmm.
where restaurants need to be looking there, in that spot. Okay. And they're not. They're often, decisions are made in a vacuum. Um, they think it's got to be part of the same stack they have now. They don't want to manage another system. Um, and when we look into our community, and we see some, what I would call, immature catering solutions getting
Yeah.
selected and winning contracts for large enterprise multi-unit restaurant companies, I would say the reason that's happening is because the restaurant company doesn't really have a catering program.
Mm,
Okay. So, because if they did and they had enough pressure on the system, they would make a different decision. Okay.
yeah. Does
Yeah.
that, so how, like, if you're talking to an operator here, because I think, I mean, restaurant operators are so busy at every point in their day, right? They're doing a million different things. How is someone as an operator supposed to come in and look at all these tech solutions and figure out what's what and who's telling the truth and how to sort through all the, frankly, bullshit that is out there? How is someone supposed to do that without this huge, 30 years of context,
Yeah. I don't think it's possible.
Mm,
I think the 30 years of context is essential. And I think people need to step back from their existing systems
yeah,
and they need to bring in proper design elements. There are clear winners out there
yeah,
in each of the genres that you could put together these partners and they play well together.
yeah,
And you could, I mean, my expertise is in the catering space. I
yeah,
have some knowledge on the other stuff, I do. I mean, I've seen a lot of it, I spend time with a lot of these
yeah,
partners and they're really good at what they do in the space that they understand, right? But this
yeah,
catering thing, it's just like we haven't evolved as an industry um, yet. And then there's always this big thing about like what's good enough versus like what's best in class.
yes, yeah, yeah,
And I suppose that's the argument. I mean, perhaps the e-commerce companies can build something good enough, okay? But it's hard to imagine that it's going to be a best in class.
So the idea is that you have some of these larger companies, and because they haven't scaled catering really to the extent they have, the, they're seeing that the whatever solution they're working with is good enough to
Yeah,
sustain what they're doing, but
yeah,
they're just not seeing the kind of growth maybe that's
yeah.
looking
Because
for.
maybe they're taking one order a day or each
Yeah,
restaurant or something. But if they're going to start getting like 10 orders a day or like you're on the phones. I mean, my life, my lived life in catering was any given day, there was like 40 orders came in today, and
yeah,
it was like, 8 were for tomorrow, 10 were for the next 2 days after that. And then there was stuff for next week. And it was like, that was the nature of it. And you need to have an organization that can support those kind of transactions,
mm,
like, it's a lot, it's invoicing, it's collections, it's accounts receivable management, it's a business to business order management transaction. And they're out there. This is, bakeries have been selling to hotels forever,
yeah.
and they have all the accounts receivable, and they have they have this
Yeah, ERP
concept of
solution.
yeah, it's out there. Okay, and so we're early. Okay,
Yeah,
we're early. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, and then that leads to some of the stuff we're seeing happen. Like so, for example, Monkey got acquired
yeah,
by Valsoft. I think it's great. That means that somebody else saw value in it,
hmm,
and EasyCater determined and understood that their core is competency is being a marketplace, and this was a solutions business. It's like so the solutions business is different.
yeah,
And I mean we knew that, and so unfortunately that didn't go as planned, and but now they've picked it up, and we'll see what they end up doing. And Olo is going private. That announcement came out yesterday.
yeah.
Um, that's interesting. You know,
Interesting.
um,
Yeah,
well, I mean, it's just the next chapter in the story. But I would
yeah.
say, like in retrospect, like should Olo ever have gone public? I mean, you know, probably not.
It's easy to
So
look at things in retrospect, though. But I think
yeah,
that. Sorry,
but
go
it's
ahead.
like it's got to be. Yes, it's easy to look at, but there's got to be lessons learned too.
Yeah,
Which is
of course.
just like it's like people just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over and over. What does it mean to the industry? Well, it means now that somebody bought the company with
Mhm.
thinking there's forward future value to build. And so that's a good thing. Okay. So now whether they can execute that and what's going to happen to the culture and all that stuff, remains to be seen. I mean,
With
you
the
know,
advent of like the new AI technologies and agencies and all things that happen, what do you see is the probability of the kind of existing best in class just being leapfrogged by a new breed of solution?
yeah. Well, there's theory and then there's practice. I mean,
Yeah.
the theory is that there could be, this sort of concept of AI agents.
Hmm.
Agents are task based. So you could have an agent that just does this task. Like for example, outbound calling, boom, one agent. Inbound calling, another agent. And you can, accounting agent for invoicing, you know, and you could build these agents and bring them together potentially to automate the process. Um, and then, the big question is really, what is the consumer going to do? Like,
Yeah.
are they going to, like, do they want a frictionless experience when it comes to a complex catering order that's high stress? And
Hmm.
um, it's going to take the long time before they trust technology completely. They're always going to want a phone call or reassurance or some touch base. Like, things are going to go wrong with catering orders. If I'm buying catering and I got 30 people waiting in a boardroom for lunch, it's
Yeah.
like I'm nervous, like especially if I'm an admin person, so service has to absolutely be second to none, and
Mm.
and 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 execution has to be best in class. We know order accuracy is critical. We know that on-time delivery is absolutely critical.
Hmm.
So I think we're still building tools in the middle here, like even on the DSP side, the delivery service providers, like deliver that to these companies. They're building tech, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, we've been looking at some of the voice AI stuff. It's amazing, but are people really going to want to talk to a voice? Like, we don't
Uh,
know. We're
Probably
gonna,
not yet, right?
well, maybe. I mean, eventually. I mean, it makes sense, like eventually.
Hmm.
And these tools are going to get so good and so accurate,
Yeah.
But there's this emotional piece of the puzzle where do humans want to interact with humans or machines, and at what point are they going? No, I don't want to do that. Like it's just like like we don't know yet.
Well, how long is it going to take for you not to be able to tell, though? That's the other question.
I think you'll always be able to tell.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I'm really excited to continue this conversation, and I think we'll be talking about a similar topic next month because I know there's
Okay.
a lot more
Yeah.
here.
Lots to talk about. Sure.
Yeah, but I think we are out of time today. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and thank
Thank
you,
you.
Earl. Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. So yeah,
Okay, Gabriel. Have
thank
a
you very
great
much.
day. Okay.
Cheers. You too. Enjoy your
Okay.
bike ride.
Good. Good to go. Good. Yeah.